You're listening to the Sustainable Angler, and my daddy's the host.
All right. Well, special thanks to my sweetheart for the introduction, and welcome to the Sustainable Angler, the podcast where we discuss the intersection of fishing, conservation, and sustainability. I'm your host, Rick Crawford. In today's episode, I'm joined by my friend, National Geographic photographer, TED speaker, and executive director of Natural Land Trust, Mac Stone. Mac and I go way back. We first met working at the A Ranch in Wyoming in 2008, and since then he's dedicated his life to using photography to protect some of the most important ecosystems on the planet. We talk about his journey from the Everglades to old-growth cypress forests, surprising discoveries he's made with National Geographic, and how imagery can change the way we think about conservation. This is a fascinating conversation about wetlands, ancient forests like Francis Beidler Forest, and why protecting these wild places still matters today. Thankfully, since we recorded a few weeks ago, the threat to expand a right-of-way by 200 feet in Beidler Forest, which would have disrupted one of the last remaining tracts of old-growth cypress and tupelo forests left on planet Earth, has been averted, thanks to people like Mac and organizations like the Audubon Society for inspiring others to take action. Let's dive in. The Sustainable Angler is available anywhere you listen to podcasts and is also airing Saturdays at 2 p.m. on Charleston's first and only community-supported radio station, OM Radio, 96.3 FM. If you like what you're hearing, an absolutely free way to show your support is by leaving the show a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This episode of The Sustainable Angler is brought to you by Emerger Strategies and A New Earth Project, the sustainability initiative of Atlantic Packaging. Fly fishing taught me that learning to read a river for trout isn't just about finding fish. It's about understanding an entire ecosystem. At Emerger Strategies, we see this as a perfect metaphor for systems thinking. Each element of the river, from water quality and habitat to the aquatic insects that transform from emergers to adult mayflies, plays a crucial role. And we understand that businesses also play a critical role in the health of the planet. Measuring and improving your company's sustainability performance is the same as protecting your home waters. And responsible business practices ensure that our rivers remain clean, habitats are preserved, and biodiversity thrives for generations to come. Because when you protect what you love, you're not just protecting the planet, you're building a brand that stands for something. At Emerger Strategies, we help your business apply this holistic approach. By integrating sustainability, you not only conserve natural resources, but also create a thriving ecosystem for your business and the planet that you love. Visit our website at emergerstrategies.com to learn more, and let's protect what we love together.
Good to be here. Wish we were doing this in person. I told you we needed to do this in some dive bar in Mount Pleasant or something.
Yeah. Well, we can do a part two.
We're gonna need to.
I think so. So, for context for everyone listening, Mac and I first met in 2008 when we were both working at the A Guest Ranch in Wyoming, a special place. If you have never been, we were lucky enough to be on the staff there. So that's when we first met. And I ended up reading yesterday one of Mac's articles, which we'll dive pretty extensively into at some point during this interview, but basically about what is happening in Beidler Forest, and we'll table that for now, though. So back to how we know each other, how this all began, but your personal background. You grew up in North Central Florida.
Yeah, Rick, you'll like this. We call it Titletown, USA. Do you know where
Okay.
that is? North Central Florida is Titletown.
Yeah, yeah. Max, a Florida Gators fans. Gators fans eat boogers. And I'm of course a Georgia fan. Um, but I'm curious about North Central Florida. What was it about these exploring these sort of swamps and springs in that area that maybe first drew you in, or maybe inspired some of your later photography?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I think it was just when I when we first moved to Gainesville, and my brother and I were just actually talking about this. My oldest brother, when we first moved to Gainesville, we in our backyard, and this is the age where of no helicopter parents, says that you come home from school and they're like, go, like just go. And so, not that they didn't love us, they just, we were three boys and very annoying, I'm sure. So
Right.
when they said just go, the area behind our house was this swamp. It was cypress trees, and there was a creek running through it. And in that creek were fossilized shark's teeth. And so every single day we would come home, and they're like, they didn't even have to say go. We're just like, can't wait to go treasure hunt in this swamp and in this creek. And I just remember, because of my age then, it was like 6 and 7. I just remember thinking of the backyard and swamps as these places of like discovery, of like great imagination, and so I don't know, something about that seed sowing pretty deep in me that just continued all the way through high school and into college. And I never thought of swamps as these dangerous, spooky, scary places. I thought of them as places to go romp around and explore. And so when I first got into photography in high school, naturally I went to the places closest to my home, because I couldn't afford going, far flung places. And so I just chose what was accessible. And fortunately for me in Gainesville, what was accessible were springs and oak hammocks and swamps. And that really started to define my visual language, just based on proximity.
Right.
And then I realized no one else is shooting this. No one else is really talking about these places in the way that I feel about them. And so just kind of stuck, I guess.
So wetlands and swamps, and I mean, this has kind of been the world that you have, I guess, exposed the rest of the world to, in some ways. But you've got a book, Everglades, America's Wetlands, which, fanboy, of course. I'm going to say is a classic for conservation storytelling. But how did that book come to be? How did you find yourself in Everglades National Park for extended periods of time, and how did that book come into being?
That's you know what? It's really funny that it actually comes back to Beidler Forest in a weird way.
Okay.
So after we met at the ranch, I left Wyoming, and I was looking for something, and there was a job posting for a naturalist position at Francis Beidler Forest in Harleyville, South Carolina. And the way they advertised it was, come work in an old growth swamp, never been cut, virgin swamp. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never seen, I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah.
Everything I romped around in is all secondary growth. And, you hear about old growth forests, but you associate them with like bristlecone pines or, the Pacific Northwest. And so I'd never seen what an old growth swamp looked like. So anyway, I took that job. And I worked out there and just like fell in love immediately. That place is just so spectacular. And I had a really good time and a really great relationship with the director, Norm Brunswig, and the manager, Mike Dawson, and at the time, the education coordinator, Mark Musselman. And we just had a blast. I photographed the property. Um, I won a couple contests with images from international contests with images from the property. So I really felt like this little like tiny gym in South Carolina was finally getting some recognition and getting seen by a larger audience. And then once my time was done, it was then time another summer came around and I was like, oh, you know what? I need to go back to the ranch. So I went back to the ranch where you met your wife out there
That's
in
right.
2008, and then I met my wife in 2009. But while I was at the ranch, I was talking with Audubon, who owns Francis Beidler Forest, and they're like, "We'd love for you to stay in the Audubon family if you'd be willing to." I said, "Yeah, sure. I just want to work in an interesting place and see some interesting things." And they said, "Well, there's a position opening up with Dr. Jerry Lorenz down at the Everglades Science Center. Would you want to do that?" I said, "Yeah." What does it entail? They're like, "Oh, it's just long days in the Everglades. You get into some remote areas." And I said, "I absolutely want that job."
I didn't
And
realize
so
that's how that came into being. That's awesome.
yes. And so with Norm Brunswig's recommendation, I got that job as a field biologist, and I was studying fish populations, which the wading birds were eating, and then later became the head of spoonbill research. So going out onto islands and monitoring spoonbill nesting populations. And the coolest thing is that job, because it's field work, we're leaving out of Tavernier, which is near Isla Morada in the Keys. That's where we were based. So I lived in the Florida Keys. And every morning we'd be getting up at like 4 a.m. and boating across Florida Bay in the best light, in the best conditions, in the places that no one else was allowed to go. And then 3 times a month, we had helicopter days where we would go in a helicopter it's just like such an embarrassment of riches. So we would go in a helicopter at sunrise over Everglades National Park, get dropped in a remote location for 8 hours a day, do our fish sampling. Then a helicopter would land in the water with these floats, and then you climb back on the helicopter and then go back. And so you would do that 3 times a month. And so the context for which I saw the Everglades was based on these really like core zones, these areas in the Everglades that very few people get to see in the context of the broader watershed, which is, how water shapes these landscapes that you get from the aerial perspective, because drones aren't allowed in Everglades National Park. So, getting up in the helicopter allowed me to see things that I could only dream of. So it was the best possible access in one of the most remote parts of the backcountry for 3 years.
Wow.
So that's how the book was born. And then in that time, as a field biologist, you're meeting other biologists, you're meeting other agencies, you're meeting other folks, you're meeting fishermen and captains, and you're hearing about all these, small issues that contribute to the larger issue. And I think one of the largest issues impacting the Everglades is the fact that most people don't know what it really is. They think it's a national park, but it's all these different lands, and it's this watershed that extends from headwaters near Orlando all the way down to Florida Bay. So that book was an effort to try and put imagery to the issues and highlight a few of the issues that then represent the larger narrative of Everglades restoration. And then after 3 years, my then girlfriend, who we've been doing long distance, Hannah, was like, "All right, Dak, what's happening here? What are we doing?" I'm like, "Oh, it's great. It's great. You should come down to the Look, you should come down to the Keys." She's like, "What am I going to do in the Keys? No, I'm not going to go live down in the Keys." I was like, "Oh, okay." So that's when I moved up to South Carolina. And
Yeah.
so she's from Spartanburg, and that's when I moved up to Greenville, and I've been there since. And it's been really, really wonderful.
Well, another shameless plug, Mac's talented wife and our friend Hannah is responsible for the Emerger Strategies logo and the Sustainable Angler logo. So thank you, Hannah.
Classic Hannah.
Yeah, that's right.
Elevating brands.
Yeah. That's what you do, right? Well, so I something you mentioned, right? So you're studying. I got to ask this: what were some of the findings from the fish studies that you did related to these birds in the Everglades? Anything cool?
Yeah, well, this is a multi-decade study. It's one of
Okay.
the longest held fish and bird studies in the country. And so we would find, these patterns, areas that were drying up because they weren't receiving enough water. And you would study, these locked off areas, and you go back and you study them every month to see how many fish, and is the water drawing down the way it should. And if the water draws down the way it should, that means that the wading birds who have, specific leg heights can only forage in those areas at specific times. So you take these prey base, that's what you call the fish, the prey base for the birds. You take prey base abundance and you relate it to nesting bird success. So you're pairing that fish data with counting how many nests are successful in Florida Bay, which are their historic nesting grounds on these islands in Florida Bay. And you draw a comparison. Are there enough prey-based fish for these birds? And if they're not, and you also have nesting collapse, then you can tell how you can help influence, I guess, policymakers on how to make sure that more fresh water comes down into Florida Bay. So in our time, we would see changes in fish populations. We'd see an influx in invasive fish species. We'd see a complete changeover in habitat. Area where you would have these kind of wide open foraging zones would then be overtaken by red mangroves because of saltwater intrusion into the lower Everglades. So, yeah, and we also saw wading bird colonies diminish in Florida Bay, where a lot of the spoonbills, those are the main birds we were studying, a lot of the spoonbills have started to move interior because of sea level rise and saltwater intrusion, meaning that they can't find places to forage in their historic foraging zones. So they're moving inland instead to find more stable foraging habitat.
Is that now? This might be a stretch, but I've noticed more spoonbills in the Low Country. Is that a result of that sort of them trying to figure out where's a good spot for us to
Yes.
forage?
Yeah, so spoonbills are trying to figure out where to go, and it's a good thing they're ambulatory. They can move, they can fly, and they can figure out where is their next best nesting location and year-round foraging location. Ideally, they're not trying to migrate, like other bird species. They're trying to find a place that's kind of Goldilocks zone, like the Everglades used to be for them, or Florida Bay used to be. The Everglades is still good for them, but you need consistent water flow and water drawdown like you would have in a historic Everglades.
And in your opinion, as a field biologist, as a photographer, as someone who spent probably more than most people alive on the planet in Everglades National Park, what are some of the biggest threats that it faces?
Well, the biggest issue facing the Everglades. Now, when I say the Everglades, I'm not referring to the national park. I'm referring Everglades as a watershed. It is a 200-mile long, 50-mile wide watershed. Actually, there's like a map of it behind me. You can probably see it, where the historic River of Grass would flow south from Lake Okeechobee, and it would nourish these bays and these estuaries. And what we did is we stopped 2/3 of that water, that historic fresh water, from flowing south, and we sent it east and west on the Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie rivers. Um, and the challenges have changed over the years. Certainly, no one anticipated when they built the Hoover Dike and when they started developing South Florida that 9 million people would be living there. So those challenges are changing every day, and depending on what species you are and what issue you're interested in, you could pinpoint a number of issues. But the largest one in terms of restoration and health of the overall Everglades is getting more fresh water to its historic path. And because that system was mechanized, we have to now re-mechanize it to the benefit of people and wildlife and ecosystems. So that's the number one thing, is making sure that water follows this historic path, because inevitably you are going to have sea level rise, and you are going to have this slow change on the south part of South Florida as red mangroves creep inward, habitats cycle and changes. They have done that historically as well. But the best and greatest push against that is a steady and seasonal flow of fresh water. Get that hydraulic push so that the gradient gives you more time. It gives birds, it gives fish, it gives animals more time to actually mobilize and to move and to be a little more resilient to those changes. It also, that fresh water lessens the frequency and the gravity of algae blooms that would happen in Florida Bay with these massive seagrass die-offs, which I know concerns you and probably your listeners who are anglers in Florida Bay. And so that hydraulic push and that influx of fresh water that has been filtered through miles of marsh and sawgrass would then be a really great solution. And we've certainly done a lot of that. We've moved a good amount of water south, but I think with this new EAA reservoir and the accompanying STAs that would clean that water, we'd be able to limit the number of releases east and west where they historically did not go, and instead move that water south. But it still has to be done at the right time and the right quantity and quality, because you have animals, you have alligators, you have sparrows, you have all kinds of animals that have evolved with a system that has been seasonal. And so you like the Everglades, you have to get it just right.
Interesting. Yeah. So timing it as if it was flowing naturally because of the rains that would have been naturally occurring.
Most people I don't think realize that there is South Florida, everyone's like, oh, well, it's always summer there, but it's not. And hydrologically is probably the biggest seasonal shift. Is you used to have this really strong and defined wet season in the summer. And when that rain falls in South Florida, it fills up all these wetlands. And as the water fills up in the wetlands, it allows those fish and crayfish and all other aquatic species to reproduce and to disperse all throughout. Okay, so you have these big full wetlands. And then as that water starts to drop in the winter, which is the dry season, the water drops, but it doesn't all drop evenly. Some areas are a little more upland than others, and some areas are a little more shallow than others. So it starts dropping. And as that water drops, it reveals these pockets of concentrated prey for wading birds, for alligators, for a number of species, right? They rely on that seasonal drawdown because they time their nesting with that drawdown. So for birds like spoonbills and egrets and wood storks and ibis, they all have historically timed their nesting to coincide with that drawdown so they can feed enough to feed themselves and feed their chicks. Yeah. So they rely on that seasonal pulse. But
how about that?
In a mechanized system where you have a water management authority that is controlling when that water is released, if they're not it or allocating it in that kind of widespread river of grass dispersed fashion, then that provides very little benefit to the animals that have evolved alongside that system for eons.
Wow, I had not heard that perspective. Matt, that's interesting.
It's wild, man, and it's wild to see it. Like you see it if you're out in the field, and if you're out in the field for long periods of times, you can see these animals changing habitats. Like these, like I've seen countless colony collapses, and it's very sad. So you have these colonies of birds, of chicks. Well, I mean, there's nothing more like vulnerable and sad to see than a spoonbill chick. There's just little pink puffballs with like soft spoons as mouths. And you have these colonies that, because of the change of the ecosystems, they've been relegated to one place where they can forage, one place that is adequate. And so they lay their eggs, they hatch their chicks, and then you get one rain event that then floods that place out, that gets too deep for their little legs to be able to forage, and then the chicks starve, and then it's gone. So you need that matrix of dispersed fish and matrix of habitats for them, and that's why I think they're moving inland, because historically in Florida Bay, they've a lot of these areas have been flooded out.
It's wild. All right. Well, learn something new every day. That's fascinating. So, Mac, you have delivered a TED Talk that's been viewed over 1 million times, which is pretty insane.
Those are rookie numbers. I got to get those numbers up.
Yeah, right. So on that note, what role do you think storytelling, and especially visual storytelling, plays in shaping how people value wild places? And you may have kind of answered this a little bit, but I'll ask it anyway. With what you were trying to do, and I think successfully did with Everglades, America's Wetland, the book. But
well, I think growing up, I knew a lot more about ancient Egypt and about the Amazon rainforest and about Antarctica than I ever knew about Florida Springs or the Everglades or the places that were in my backyard. And I only learned about those places through experience and seeing them and exploring them. And then when I got into photography and I started showing friends these images, and I had a great support community, University of Florida, Titletown, USA, as is full of professors, so many jorts and cutoff shirts. It is a perfect academic haven. No, it's the community like supports art, and they support inquiries and questions. And when I started showing images to people, they're like, "Yeah, show me more, tell me more about this place." And then they started getting interested and involved in it. And so it's always just been a vehicle for me to talk about the things I care about and to share what I know with other people, because none of us have enough time, right, to visit all the places we want to see or to care about. Like we were talking before this started about all the things that are happening and how it's so hard to divert attention.
Yeah.
But if you have an effective image that resonates with people, or an effective film or video that grabs people, you can begin to whisper, deeper knowledge, and I don't know, you can get people, I think, to empathize with what you've seen, even though they'll never go there themselves. And I don't anticipate majority of people will see the places that I've seen, but through the images, they can kind of get a sense of what the message is I'm trying to send.
Well, you certainly, with the visual, the photography can appreciate its beauty, right? And enough to say, this is, maybe I'll never go there, but I certainly wouldn't want to see a place as beautiful as this ruined, and when it could have been prevented,
Yeah.
At a bare minimum, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly. And like for me, I'm mostly I'm mostly interested like in ecosystems,
Mm.
because in documenting like an ecosystem like the Everglades, for example, you can distill so many different lessons that aren't just applicable to that ecosystem, whether it's, restoration or habitat protection or endangered species protection or creating wildlife corridors. Like, all those issues are so applicable to any other landscape issue that you have, regardless of where you are. And so by focusing on ecosystems, you can draw these universal lessons, I think, that other people, regardless of where they are, if they're in Washington State or in Russia or in Europe or wherever, like, you can say, oh, yeah, there's something to be gleaned here. And I have seen it. Like, I photographed on the Mekong River, for WWF, in Cambodia, and they were trying to protect these overhunted birds.
Mm.
And the way they were trying to protect them is they would put wardens on these islands where these birds were nesting to prevent people from coming and harvesting the eggs and the nests. And that is a one-to-one draw on the playbook of how National Audubon Society was formed, based on, like, that's how the wading bird populations were protected, by sending wardens. So even in the solutions, you can kind of export solutions to other places, and that's what I find most compelling.
Well, on similar lines, you're also a contributing photographer for National Geographic. What has been the most powerful or surprising story maybe you've been able to share through your platform, or through that platform, National Geographic?
I would say the most surprising one is one that was not, it's not in my wheelhouse. Like, this is not something I have historically photographed, and that was the discovery, and documentation of these undisclosed and unmarked graves of Revolutionary War soldiers in Camden, South Carolina. Did you see this coverage?
No.
It's wild. It was wild, man. And this is on the Camden battlefield, so of course they knew there were soldiers out there, but they were unmarked graves, and a lot of time people will go out and they'll use metal detectors to try and find bullets and buttons and all kinds of things, and so they will just dig down and they'll disturb these graves of these unmarked soldiers, because many of them were just kind of buried in, not, well, I guess you could say mass graves, but 4 and 5 soldiers just kind of piled on top of each other, because we lost that battle, and so the American soldiers were just kind of haphazardly tossed into these holes. And so a number of archaeologists from DNR and from the University of South Carolina went out to go and uncover these graves, and so I went to photograph it, and it was just so interesting to me. Here they are in this longleaf pine savanna, and they're exhuming very carefully these graves, and you're finding these pewter buttons that say USA on them, and it was such a, I mean, my family has served in the military, so there's just like this, I don't know, it was a very, like, emotional experience, I guess. You're sitting there looking at, the first Patriots, and you're holding these buttons, like the first time that this utterance of United States of America was inscribed on something, and it was
Wow.
just so powerful. And you're looking out on this ecosystem of longleaf pine, and you can just kind of imagine this battle. And it was really interesting, and really, really incredible to watch how these archaeologists so carefully handled the exhumation. Yeah, it was great. So that was the
That's
most surprising.
unbelievable. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
It was wild. I mean, and for me, it's like, I grew up reading National Geographic, and those
Yeah,
are the kind of
totally.
stories you read through in the magazine, saying, "Wow, like you get to go, discover dinosaurs and
Yeah.
ancient cultures and things." And here, it's like I just keep finding interesting stories in my backyard. And it's because there's so much to see just locally. You do not have to go super far to find interesting stories.
We set out with a New Earth project to really start a movement.
It's a global coalition of people who are deeply concerned and want to accelerate the transition away from problematic packaging to more sustainable solutions.
Our entire value proposition was built on helping companies package things better. We were doing sustainability before sustainability was cool. We just called it packaging optimization. And packaging optimization really is about using less. And we built our whole business on that. People send us their products, their goods, and we help them design packaging systems and solutions for the least possible cost, utilizing the least amount of material. Use less is always the right answer.
And that's what I see with companies like a New Earth Project is it's like we're just trying to create solutions for big companies and small, that makes it easier for them, cheaper for them, whatever it is, and then has less impact. Not just trying to tell people you should have less impact and making the choice forced on them. Like, make it better for everybody, and it'll make it better for the whole world.
We see the problem, and we are with you.
And then the main story I had in the magazine was a passion project, turned into a storytelling grant, and then turned into a magazine story. And it's called Ghost Forests, and it ran as a pretty big story in the magazine. And it's all about cypress as the most resilient tree on planet Earth, now dying in droves along the coast, forming what are called ghost forests. And so the story took a deep dive into the most ancient pockets of old growth cypress left in the country. And there's only a handful of these places left. And then comparing it to, what these trees teach us about the past in terms of what their core samples reveal, which is like a whole nother story in and of itself. Super fascinating.
Well, you got to share like something from that because now I'm
Okay.
all.
Okay. I mean, it's really amazing. So there's a dendrochronologist, which means his name is Dr. Dave Staley, who studies tree rings. And so he takes these core samples of these trees with an incremental ring core, and he goes into these trees, and he prefers old growth trees because obviously they're the oldest, and so they have the longest chronology. And like growing up, you learn how trees produce annual rings.
Yeah.
Right. So every year the tree grows and they produce annual rings. Well, like your random oak that you might see, in Charleston, for example, these big old oaks, they're growing at like an inch a year, right? Like they put on, or loblolly pines. Maybe the oaks aren't doing that, but loblolly pines, for example, are putting on massive growth every year. Well, these ancient cypress trees are growing at like a fingernail width every year. And it's because they're starved of nutrients. They live in these very nutrient poor ecosystems with, just basically starved of all the things that, these loblolly pine groves or these other systems have. And so he's putting in these incremental ring cores. In 2017, he put one into a tree on the Black River in North Carolina. And when he pulled out the core and then took it to his lab, he realized he had just discovered the oldest cypress tree known on planet Earth.
What?
Which at the time was, 1,700 years old. We thought it was the longest lived cypress. And this one was 2,624 years old. And no one ever thought cypress could live that long, because here they are, this tree living in water, subject to rot, subject to storms, subject to hurricanes. This tree that just has endured so much. Here they are thriving. And we didn't know they could live that long because we took 40 million acres of cypress that used to exist in the southeastern US, and we cut down all but 12,000 acres. And so now less than 1/10 of 1% is left, basically. And it's only in a few pockets. So Dr. Dave Staley is studying these tree ring chronologies, not just to tell us how old the trees are, but once he looks very closely in a microscope at these tree rings and he correlates it with rainfall data, what he realized is that these trees are mapping out the annual fall of water in relation to the spring growth season. So the more it rains in the spring, the more this tree grows. And so if you look at these tree rings, and you can see it so clearly, you get these really thin lines when it's a drought, and you get these very wide lines when it is a rainy season. So he can look back 2,600 years before the written record and tell what was the climate in these areas.
That's unbelievable.
So it's unbelievable, and these trees do it with incredible fidelity, like highly accurate to the amount of precipitation. And so he predicted using these tree ring chronologies in different areas in Virginia and North Carolina and South Carolina. He helped make this hypothesis and the prediction. Maybe this is what happened to the Jamestown colony. And sure enough, he looks at these chronologies and he finds there was this massive drought during that period, which could have collapsed the colony.
Wow.
So you can learn all kinds of things in these ancient swamps. And because there are so few left, we're still unraveling secrets. And Corkscrew Swamp's another one down in South Florida. And they have a stand of ancient cypress that was never logged, just a pocket of them. And in Corkscrew Swamp, Peter Houlihan and I, he's a tropical ecologist and fellow National Geographic explorer, we climbed up into the canopy to try and photograph the pollinator of the ghost orchid for the first time. It's like something that people always hypothesized of what pollinates this flower. And so Peter and I went up there, climbed up, and there's this, what they call a super ghost up in the tree. It's about 50 feet high in the tree. And so we climbed up and rigged up a camera trap over a period of 3 months. And so a camera trap is connected to an infrared beam. And so ideally when something flies in front of that beam, it then triggers the camera and the strobes. Anyway, and in the course of that summer, made numerous photos of moth species visiting it. And the long-held hypothesis was it was only the giant sphinx moth that could pollinate that flower because it has a tongue long enough to get down into the nectar stem. And the photos revealed another pollinator, which is a fig sphinx, with actually had pollinia on its nose. And then look closer at the images of the giant sphinx moth, and it's got its proboscis all the way into the nectar stem, and its head is like an inch or two out of the flower, meaning that it can just rob that flower of nectar and never pollinate it. Now, this is like nerd. This is like high Everglades nerd stuff, but like it was.
But it had never been. No one knew the answer to this prior to that.
Correct. Everyone had thought this for decades and decades and decades, and here we had images that finally proved it. And it was very cool. We got it written up in one of the best scientific publications, Nature. And scientific reports, and there's a very cool film about it, and called "Chasing Ghosts," and that highlights mine and Peter's pursuit and Carlton Ward Jr.'s pursuit. He was photographing in the Fakahatchee Strand and the Panther Refuge, and he documented even more pollinators. And so it's just to say that like we have these ancient forests. To this day, we're still learning new things about them. We're still like unraveling secrets in these ancient places only because they still exist. only because we protected a precious few pockets of the 40 million acres, just 12,000 left. So having that story in National Geographic published was like, of course, that was a major like capstone for me, major like life moment. You know, I always wanted to have a story there. And
sure.
so like the cherry on top was that it was about something I deeply, deeply cared about.
Yeah. In South Carolina, no less.
So it covered South Carolina, Florida, North Carolina. I gotta tell you this story though. this is so ridiculous. So, oh man, this is my first assignment for the magazine, and when you get a call from National Geographic, you freak out.
Yeah.
And then like the imposter syndrome like totally kicks in, and you're like, oh man, I can't mess this up. And you really are worried about messing it up. And my editor, Anne, who's super sweet, she's like, oh Mac, you're gonna do fine. Like, just totally relax. You're all good. You don't even need to stress about it. You know, just do your thing. You know what you're doing. And I'm like, this is a setup. This is like, this is a setup. Like,
this doesn't sound right.
Oh no, it doesn't even sound close to right. You hear from like the old school guys who would photograph for the magazine, and they said, yeah, you know, there was this long held quote that says, at National Geographic, we can't publish your excuses. Like, like, you know, so I'm like, she's totally setting me up. Like, I'm going to grind. So I was photographing in on the Black River in North Carolina. And my first 2 days are aerial days where I hired a pilot to fly. And it's this tiny little, I think it was a 162 Cessna, but it was like a sardine can, tiny little thing. So you're like up against, you know, the pilot, like shoulder to shoulder, and you just have a window to shoot out of. And I get to the airport about 3 hours early, like way too early, way too eager, you know? And I'm like, wow, damn, I'm hungry. I'm going to go eat something. And so I leave the airport and I go look for anything that's nearby. And there's this Honduran restaurant, like right by the airport. I'm like, oh, sweet. Yeah. I lived in Honduras before the ranch. I was living in Honduras. So I was like, I'm there. Oh, here with my catrachos, you know, we're all good. I go out and get some baleadas and like, you know, like, man, this is a proper Nat Geo assignment, like living it. And, go in and eat, and then I come back to the airport like, this is so cool. And like right before I'm like opening the door to get on the plane, I start feeling this like cold sweat off my neck. And I'm like, oh, okay. Usually this doesn't happen until I'm flying, because I do get like air sick and seasick, and I take pills to counteract it. And anyway, I get on the plane and like it starts getting worse, and I'm like, oh no. And I know exactly what's going to happen. Like, I'm like, damn it. Like, I am going to lose. I'm going to puke. And so part of what you're shooting on this river are like these sinuous bends in the river. And so that requires a lot of banking in the plane. So it's like, I'm like, here we go. It was like hard right. And so he'd take it hard right. And I'm like, oh my God. And he goes, hey, Mac, if you're, that's how he talked. Mac, if you're gonna get sick, make sure you grab the Herlex 3000. And I was like, well, I don't know what that is. I was like, I think I'm okay for now. And I'm like, and I'm like, all right, bank again, like holding it in. He's like, well, the Herlex is right back there. I was like, what the heck is a Herlex 3000? So I'm like, I look back behind the seat, and they're like, it's about to come out now. And so I reach behind, there's this like canister with a handle on it. Like, okay, this has got to be it. And so he's banking again, and I'm just about to lose it. And so I stick my face in this thing. He goes, what are you doing? And I go, oh, I'm going to get sick, man. He goes, well, don't throw up in that. I pee in that. I was like, what do you want from me? So I, like, having no time for it, I just grabbed my Nalgene and I just like puked in it. And so I'm just sitting there like throwing up, shooting photos, throwing up. horrible photos. And then the next morning, and then I was throwing up till 1 a.m. And the next morning was another aerial day. And I was just like spent but also excited. The sun was rising, fog coming up, like perfect conditions. And then my pilot's like, well, we can't lift off in this. And I was like, what what do you mean? What are you talking about? I was like, this is perfect. He's like, well, it's better to be on the ground wishing you're up in the air than up in the air wishing you were on the ground. And I was like, I cannot fail at this. Like, you don't understand. The stakes are so high. I need to shoot. And he's like, well, let's wait an hour. So I missed all the good light. Anyway, that was like the first 2 days of my first assignment. And I was just completely hamstrung by anxiety and like fear of failure. So
well, it's, for any aspiring photographers that are listening to this, it's normal. So you're not alone.
yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit. Let's dive deeper for what initially. Well, let me preface this. We've been trying to do an interview, not this interview, but an interview for several years. And we were always trying to do it in person because we don't get to see each other that often. We're like, it'll be fun. We'll get together. Stars never align. But I read your article, which I think was published in The State, your opinion piece. And I was like, man, we gotta do this. Like, this is timely.
Yeah.
You are way more versed in what is happening than I am. I know as much as I read in your article. So could you tee this up for what is happening in Beidler Forest here in South Carolina, which, correct me if I'm wrong, the Audubon Society owns this property as well.
Yes. So Francis Beidler Forest is one of the most unique places left in South Carolina. Now, there's lots of beautiful places, and especially in the mountains and especially on the coast. But I say one of the most unique places left in South Carolina, and actually I should amend that to say one of the most unique places left on Earth, is because it protects an 1,800 acre stand of old growth cypress and tupelo swamp. It is the largest old growth cypress tupelo swamp left on the planet. So these are incredibly rare ecosystems, and incredibly rare to have an asset like this so close to Charleston, so close to Columbia, so close in the state. And here it is. It's this little gem, a little oasis, if you will, of how the Southeast used to look and function. These trees, some as old as 1,500 years old, are huge cypress trees, and also massive tupelo, and also the associated uplands that are with that, which are oak trees and ironwoods and all kinds. You get this intact forest. It's not just a stand of cypress trees. It is an old growth forest, meaning that it is everything in the forest, the new growth, the decay, these braided sloughs that go through it. It is just one of the most incredible places on the planet. And it's right 20 minutes from Charleston, and very few people go to see it. Now, what is happening in Beidler Forest is Santee Cooper is proposing to expand an existing right-of-way.
And sorry to interject, for anyone listening, Santee Cooper is a state-owned public utility in South Carolina. Sorry to interrupt, but just for anyone not in South Carolina, but go ahead.
Yes. So Santee Cooper, they hold a right-of-way easement in the forest currently. It's 125 feet wide, and it was granted in the early 40s, I think 1941. Francis Beidler Forest was formally protected and bought by the Audubon Society and has been managed and stewarded by them since the late 60s. So this easement right away actually happened at like the height of the cypress industrial logging of the American Southeast. So this corridor already exists through the forest. Santee Cooper is proposing to expand that right of way by 100 feet on each side, which would essentially triple the size of the existing right of way. And in that tripling, what would happen is you would cut all those trees, and they would cut what they call problem trees. Anything that jeopardizes the line or could potentially jeopardize the line, they would cut. Now, in my mind, that is bonkers.
Yeah, same.
It's one thing to say, okay, I understand that the right of way is already there. That is now kind of managed as a pollinator meadow, and that's fine. We have the capability as human beings, as a modern society, to upgrade things without causing further harm into the forest. We now know in 2025 just how globally unique this forest is, that why would we allow any further cutting in this forest? Every part of it is unique and special. And it's not just about where are the big cypress trees. It is about the connectivity of the whole and to function as a forest. And so my opposition to this has just simply been on the basis of morality, that here you have one of the most unique ecosystems on Earth, which is an old growth cypress swamp, of which there are only approximately 12,000 acres left on the planet. And you're proposing to cut up to 50 acres of this one. And it's like, this just doesn't make any sense. Go around it or upgrade the existing line to stay within the existing right of way. And I have personal experience in this right of way. I put out a camera trap once. I was photographing beavers when the water levels come up. They then expand into these kind of fringe forest habitats. And they'll gnaw on trees, and so I put up a camera trap on one of these stands of trees, hopefully to get like a beaver chewing at the tree at night, and with strobes and all this stuff. Is you create this kind of field studio, and it was on the edge of the right of way, and I put my camera out. I left it there for a couple of weeks, and then I went back to go check on it, and Santee Cooper had come in and cut all the trees because they deemed them as problem trees, which were only, 10 feet tall. And they cut them all down, smashed my camera. I lost about $2,000 worth of gear. And so I got to see very well, like, this is, how they manage these right-of-ways is also important. And the language they use is important. And so my feeling on this is that these edges are well-defined, and they should stay those edges. We should not creep further into the old growth, because this is a national treasure, in my opinion.
And not only, like you said, it's not just a national treasure, it's a global treasure. It's something, one of the only, I guess you maybe couldn't call it intact, but as close to intact maybe as you can get for an old growth cypress forest.
It's very intact. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the only thing that goes through it, this existing right of way granted in the 40s. And there's a boardwalk that goes through it, and they purposefully wove this boardwalk so it didn't cut down any trees. And actually, when trees fall in this forest and hit Audubon's boardwalk, they just build the boardwalk back over. They don't cut the trees, they just let them lay. Because the function of this forest is not to be this well manicured thing. It's meant to be this complex system of new growth and decay, and every little piece of it matters, and they've managed it that way. We owe Audubon a tremendous debt of gratitude for protecting and stewarding this place. I mean, I just can't say it enough. It's so different. I mean, even in the Black River in North Carolina, that's really striking, very old trees. But those trees have also, because they're so old, it's not really considered merchantable timber because they're so gnarly and hollow and just like contorted by time. You get 1,000 more years, time is going to wear on you. We're in Beidler. very different because this is like a merchantable timber. Like these are beautiful, stout, straight, healthy cypress trees. And I haven't seen any other forest that looks like that. None. And now corkscrew is old growth swamp too, but this is the tropics. It's very different down there. Um, and the trees aren't as old as they are in Beidler. So when I say that it's globally unique and unique in the state and unique in the country, I mean that with a lot of experience, and I mean that with a lot of heart too.
And I guess it's right near there, but I went on a kayak tour last summer through a nonprofit I'm involved with, the Sustainability Institute, and Dana Beach took us to a property, and we paddled to the oldest cypress, I guess, in South Carolina. It's like 1,500-year-old tree or something like that. I might have that wrong, but it was a very old cypress that we went out of our way to go paddle to.
Great.
And that that was my first experience in a swamp like that, of any sort. And
yeah, they
it was
just
beautiful.
feel different.
Yeah, it was awesome. Totally unique experience.
Yeah, that's the thing, is I think once you see an old growth forest, it clicks. And I think that's what these photos and this work is about. It's about, I want it to click for people. I want people to say, oh, I had no idea there's old growth still here. And this is what it's supposed to look like. Because once you see old growth, you say, oh my God, this is the way a forest should look, or a forest of this kind should look. And you realize that all the forests you've been seeing before, all those beautiful views, you go on the Blue Ridge Parkway, you go up to Table Rock in South Carolina, you go up to Caesar's Head, or wherever you go to see these amazing views, and you look out and you see this sea of green and canopy. All of that was logged. All of it.
Wow.
All of it. I mean, like in the long settled areas of the American South, like it was rapaciously logged. And we don't have the American chestnut anymore. So like our baseline of what these forests should look like is totally shifted. It's completely different. But these anchors, these foundations of old growth swamp are so important because they are touchstones to what these ecological regions used to be. And so having these baselines can then inform future management. They can become the nucleus of a broader conservation momentum. And so I think when you have something as spectacular and as unique as Beidler, the effort to not harm it needs to be elevated.
Yeah,
the bar needs to be raised on, okay, maybe in this 1.5 mile stretch, 7,000 feet is what that right of way goes through the forest. In this stretch, we're going to do things different because this is different. This is unlike anything else. I think that's a fair thing to ask. And that's all I'm asking.
Well, and so on that note, you had linked in your article, but I don't know if there were any other ways. If anyone is listening to this episode and wants to do something about this, how can they maybe voice their opinion and support of leaving Beidler Forest alone and intact?
There is a link in the article, at the end of the article that I wrote. It takes you to Audubon's page that then connects you into a form you can fill out. You can also I don't know what the correct terminology is, but you can levy a complaint essentially to the state, and you can look that up on where exactly to do that. It's not as clear to me than going through Audubon's way, because they kind of fill it in, they send it to the appropriate authority. And so that's the way I recommended people to go. But, it's if it moves you, it's just, I think these these places, there's certain places that are truly special, and not in like a tree hugger, not in a, everything is sacred way. I'm not saying that. Like we need utility, we need power. I live with power, but we need to be doing it in a thoughtful way that acknowledges and respects the unique assets that we have, all of them. And I don't think we should compromise on this one piece. It's like this somehow survived the saw thanks to Audubon, and the least we can do is help protect what's left.
Well, I think too, this is, I know that we're starting to, we're seeing it in Beidler. I wish that this was only unique to Beidler and we could, but I'm sure it's happening in lots of other states, right? There's a tension, it seems, between development and conservation, right? How do we responsibly meet the needs of the present, right? And conserving our resources in a way that so that future generations are able to meet their needs. And we're also seeing another example of this, if you're not aware, in South Carolina, that's happening on the Edisto River, further south of Charleston. I know a little bit about it. I'll share some info on it, but there's a methane gas plant that they want to put next to the Ace Basin on the Edisto River. And it just sort of brings to me we're sort of at this crossroads, which I'm sure we've been on many crossroads over. We're not the first people to face these challenges, I guess, but there's like, do we need a methane plant next to a protected and conserved area? Are we considering
the burden of proof needs to be on them to prove that that is the only place that they could put it? That it shouldn't be, the burden of proof shouldn't be on the public to say, are you willing to tolerate this?
Right. And by the way, and pay for it.
Yes. And pay for it.
Yeah.
We had a similar fight in the upstate here in the mountains, and Duke wanted to run new transmission lines through decades of protected properties that we helped assemble up here in South Carolina on the state line, that ran through neighborhoods, and they were saying the same things. Well, this is where it needs to go. This is the most logical path. And it's like, no, this is just the most economically expedient thing for you to do, but it's not what the people want. And people came out and they opposed it, and sure enough, they found another way.
Oh yeah,
they found a different route. I guess it was possible.
Yeah.
It's just to say, it's like, you gotta, when something doesn't feel right, when you have these special places that have taken years to assemble or years of concerted effort to protect, then that protection doesn't stop when it's acquired. It actually is a constant thing, and that's something we all need to keep in mind.
All right. Well, I've got a question here for you to wrap with, Mac, and I appreciate you sharing your knowledge, your experience, your story. Always great to catch up with you, of course. But you have built your life and career around telling these stories that so happen to be swamps, wetlands, and wild places. And the work that I do, and I'm sure a lot of other folks do in the conservation and sustainability world, you can kind of get beat over the head with a lot of negativity, right? Things maybe aren't looking so good depending on how you look at it. So the question is, what gives you hope that we can still protect these ecosystems for our kids? We're both fathers, and future generations to experience.
Oh man, it's no problem at all for me to dig into the well of hope, and it's mostly because the conservation work I do and the people that I surround myself with, like we have wins every day. We go out and find these strategically important properties that are at risk of development or at risk of poor management, and we go and buy them and we protect them and then we restore them. And so, yes, there are things that happen all the time that are impacting the environment, but there's also so many things that are happening that are positive, that if you surround yourself with the people that are actually doing the positive work, I find it very hard actually to be depressed about these things, because like, yes, it hurts personally when something like this is going to impact a place I care about deeply. But at the same time, I'm also working actively to try and protect the places that I have a chance to. And when I say protect, I mean outright buy and restore and then make accessible to the public. And so that's how, just like surrounding yourself with also good vibes and good people, and people who don't just talk about it, but actually do it. You know, at the same time where we have this happening, we have a state in South Carolina that is putting more money than they ever have towards conservation. Mm-hmm. And I'm working with state agencies, and I'm working with the state parks and DNR and universities to try and protect pockets that surround their properties, or these new preserves, and creating new access areas for the public. And so, you know, there is a great movement of very intelligent people and very motivated people to protect a lot of these special pockets. You just hate to see when something like this comes up in Beidler, you say, all right, well, can't we find another way? So there's plenty of reason, I guess, to have alarm and concern. But I think if you're in the right circles and you're doing the proactive work, it's also very easy to be hopeful. We just got a property under contract a couple weeks ago. I was in Madagascar, and president of my organization was in Mexico.
As one typically is.
And, when you summer in Madagascar.
Now, hey, wait, let me interrupt for just 1 second. Is this through Naturland Trust?
Yes, Natural Land Trust.
Natural Land Trust. Sorry, I have a typo here.
Yeah, no, Natural Land Trust. So I'm in Madagascar. The president of my organization, Frank Holloman, is in Mexico, and this property comes on the market, and it's stunning. I mean, it's stunning. It's at the foothills of the escarpment. It's it's like 50 acres, so it's not huge, but that's what we have to work with, by the way, in the upstate. You don't get these massive tracts. And it comes on the market, and it has a granitic bald on it, which is a really unique geologic feature where the granite has exfoliated, and because there's no soil, a really unique array of plants grow on it. They're specialists. And a new species actually was just discovered like a few years ago on one of these balds here in the upstate. So anyway, yeah, they're like totally cool. And so through Starlink and like the very limited email communication we had, we managed to get the property under contract while we were international. And like, I don't know, it's an amazing time we live in.
Yeah.
Like, it's amazing. The connectivity, and yes, I guess there's reasons to be upset about lots of things, but there's also, like, that was pretty great. I was pretty excited. Natural Land Trust going international. And so now we're going to work for the next 5 months to raise the money and to buy this thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Where can folks find you, find the Land Trust, get more information, support your work?
Yeah, sure. You can find me online. I don't post a lot. I have a push and pull relationship with social media. I know it's not good for me, so I try to not use it too much. but I post when I'm feeling it. And my Instagram is MaxStonePhoto, and Natural Land Trust is just Natural Land Trust 1L. And you can find us on Facebook or online. It's Natural Land Trust. That's another conversation for another time. It's a remarkable thing, Rick. I think you would love this. You would love this org. It's so much fun. It's just a lean, mean conservation machine.
Love it. Well, I know we wanted to focus on Beidler today because it's very relevant and current. But rest assured, we are going to have an in-person part 2 with Mac at some point, and we'll dive deep into your other good works.
Come on up to Greenville, bring the kids, and I'll show you some cool places.
Yeah, we'll do it for sure. All right, well, special thanks to Max Stone for all he does to protect what he loves, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. The Sustainable Angler is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, and if you like what you're hearing, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. It's a chance to tell me what you like about the podcast and helps others discover it too. Thanks for listening.